wonderful stuff probably got lost. Shoot. Well, in any case, he is a rebel. He wants to fight against. Well, he grew up Jewish. He's Jewish, and as a result, during the Vichy era, okay, so when the Nazis overcame France, there was an official French government that was subservient to the Nazis, and that was the Vichy government, right? There were outside of France government that fled and basically were still at war with the Nazis. So, but where he lived, it was subservient to the Nazis, and as a result, the schools had to kick out the Jews, and so he was kicked out of school for a while. But when they lost, and then he was able to go back to school, he goes back to school. But you get the sense that he's on the edge. He's not officially accepted. But eventually he gets to go to Paris, he goes to school there, does well, and eventually becomes a professor, then becomes very popular and so on. But you can imagine that what enables him to be popular was his rebellion against, in this case, structuralism. Structuralism basically was an attempt to figure out the nature of the structure of language. That's continuing the whole idea of the theory of meaning, semiotics. How do you analyze language to figure out what the structure of the language is? Remember, we've talked about Noam Chomsky and his argument that there's a depth grammar that all human languages have in common and so on. But there's an attempt to establish a structure. And what he, of course, wants to do is rebel against this, and so we end up then with deconstruction, is what it becomes famous as. Let's go to deconstruction. So deconstruction is an attempt to attack the powerful by looking at their text. And this gets into legitimating narratives. You're trying to undercut their legitimating narrative. What's a legitimating narrative? What's a type of narrative? What do we mean by narrative in this case? Remember, narratives are neither true nor false. They're stories that might have true or false elements. I mean, Aesop's fables, no true elements, basically. The raven's arguing with, the tiger or something. Whatever, right? Different animals. Mice pulling the thorn out of the lion's paw. Whatever, right? You get all kinds of crazy fictional things, and then there's a moral to the story. The hare versus the tortoise. Whatever. Sticking to the keeping your nose to the grindstone wins the race, or whatever the heck the moral. I'm screwing them all up, but you get the idea. That's totally fictitious. And when you get to religious narrative, you have folks like C.S. Lewis that point out that religious narratives are actually more important than the truth, in the sense of a scientific sense, because all of our values come from accepting a particular narrative. It gives us that sense of who we are, what the earth is like, and why we're here, and what our goal in life is, right? That comes from the narratives that we believe. So those narratives legitimate our behaviors, right? They legitimate the laws that we create, because we have a particular belief and a narrative that says this is what the United States stands for, equality for all. Well, obviously that's an evolving gesture of some sort. But basically, the values that you believe in don't come from the facts. This is a table. What kind of value do I get out of that? This is a good table. That's neither true nor false, but based on that, I can see a company wanting to make more of them. right? You know, so the legitimating narrative for why we make more of these tables, right? So narratives are neither true nor false, but they create power by creating a sense of value that then people try to live according to these values, right? Problem with those narratives, by the way, is that I should have Lyotard, another French philosopher, died in 98, but Lyotard gives us a text called The Postmodern Condition. What is postmodern, by the way? It's described in here after the 1950s, roughly. I've heard some argue even from like the 1890s, but that might also be called post-industrial. Once you become industrial, now you live in a post-industrial world, at least if you're in the industrialized society, right? But once you reach the postmodern, for instance, Lyotard argues that you end up with a crisis of narratives. And that's because at this point, studying language, studying narratives, has taught us that these are fictions that are created by individuals for the establishment of their values, for establishment of a particular way of life. And they are in conflict with one another. But we also, by coming to understand how humans make these, we now no longer believe in these narratives. Remember, Kierkegaard rebels against this recognition of narratives are man-made. And I now, as an existentialist, want to establish the narrative that I'm going to believe in for myself. I'm not going to believe the narrative the church tells me or that you tell me. I want to build my own narrative, that I believe in, right? Nietzsche argued that, you can't really believe in any narrative for very long. What you're really going to enable yourself to feel a sense of power is by constantly creating a new narrative. Never feeling like you're done, never letting your previous versions of your narrative control you, because the power is the ability to create new narration as you go. And remember, my favorite is Madonna, who is still out there, plugging away, creating new narration constantly, so that no one can keep up with her, etc. Well, basically, the problem we have is we now have a crisis of narratives because people don't believe them anymore, and as a result, you have this situation where, as Billie Eilish sings for us in the movie Barbie, what was I made for? What was I made for? Literally, of course you're a doll, and Mattel made you to sell and make money off of poor girls, the guys I don't know of buying them, even the Ken dolls, even if the Ken doll doesn't have a penis, what the heck. You've all seen the movie, I hope, so that you realize I'm not just saying that on my own. That's part of the movie, right? I don't want to lose my job because I use the word penis in class, or vagina, right? Barbie comes up to a bunch of folks in the movie and says, and by the way, I don't even have a vagina, and he doesn't have a penis. You seen the movie? That's, and I think that, the gang is sitting there dumbfounded, like, huh? You've seen the movie, right? Crisis of narratives. What was I made for? I have to create my own value, says the doll. Or are other people that I'm going to join in league with going to help create my narrative for me? Is it, really I should be out there creating equality for women and so on? Is that what the doll was supposed to do? And it seems to have done just the opposite, according to the movie, right? But so we could reverse that by all of a sudden making everybody behave according to our new ideals, which actually make the men just subservient to the women, which I don't know how that's going to work, if you've seen the movie, right? But the crisis of narratives, that does away with values, it does away with social unity, it does away with all the things that narratives are supposed to accomplish, right? So this is the concern with the postmodern situation, is that we no longer have narratives to supply our values and our societies, the social structure. If reality is socially constructed, we've erased the opportunity for society to create reality, a reality that we would all believe in, right? Simplifying to the extreme, he says here, I define postmodern as incredulity toward meta-narratives. This incredulity is undoubtedly a product of progress in the sciences, but that progress in turn presupposes it to the obsolescence of the meta-narrative apparatus of legitimation corresponds, most notably, the crisis of metaphysical philosophy and of the university institution which in the past relied on it, etc., right? I'm thinking just recently what we're seeing, for example, in 15 different campuses in the United States, according to the news last night. We have protests at a lot of them with individuals, not all of whom are from the university, but they're there at the university protesting against what's going on in Israel and Gaza, right? So you have all these protesters that are there with flags and things, all supporting the phrase "from the river to the sea," right? From the river to the sea. Well, depending on whether they understand it that way or not, some interpret that to mean that they basically want to wash away all the Jews from Israel, or in fact erase Israel and put it back to the situation prior to the creation of Israel. Get rid of them, right? In other words, kill them all, right? That's one way of interpreting that. Kill them all. And that's supposed to be a legitimate point of view that everybody should support. Kill these other people. Why? Well, they've been killing us for years. Okay, right? So we see that, in fact, there are some that go out with Israeli flags, I suppose. But theoretically, a campus with students that are becoming postmodern in their understanding of our understanding ought to not take sides. Recognize that these are both illegitimate in a contemporary sense, because neither side recognizes the equality of everyone. They're both fighting against another group, right? And in fact, what's the point of being religious in contemporary society? Strictly speaking, if none of these meta-narratives are believable, students ought not to believe in any of these meta-narratives. After all, they're just humanly created in order for individuals that depend on the hierarchy associated with that narrative is a proponent of that narrative in order to keep their power. And what we ought to do is try to remove all of those hierarchical structures so that none of them continue to have power. Tom?
Do you think that Alistair McIntyre would agree with this, guys?
No, Alistair McIntyre is definitely a Thomas Aristotelian, so for him,
And he's
there,
more modern than Reed, isn't he? Very young.
he's still alive.
He's still alive.
Yeah, he's still alive, but his philosophy is not more
Not
modern.
more modern. I mean, just in like he was born.
Yeah, well, McIntyre emphasizes a philosophy that works. This, let me
Are you
just,
saying that-
point out that, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
This idea of doing away with all meta narration
It's been
and
tried.
all